Why did the siren sound different this time? Madison Hale had heard drills before, heard warnings that rattled across right-like background noise in a life she had carefully constructed. But this one cut deeper. It wasn't practice. It wasn't routine. It was the sound of something unraveling. She froze where she stood, wrench slipping from her hand and clattering against the concrete floor. Around her, the hangar shuddered with motion, crew chiefs bolting for the line, mechanics dropping tools mid-repair, voices rising in clipped commands that blurred into static in her head. She didn't move. She never moved when the world demanded she step forward. That was how she had survived for 11 years, by staying small, unnoticed, indispensable but invisible, a mechanic, a shadow. But shadows can't hide when the light comes crashing down. The siren dragged on, its shriek slicing through steel beams and into her chest. Madison forced herself to keep breathing. Just another emergency, she told herself. A bird down, maybe. Nothing to do with her. Nothing ever would. She wiped grease on her coveralls, bent low to her engine, and pretended the tremor in her hands was just fatigue. Then came the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, marching straight for her. "Hail!" Chief Master Sergeant Briggs didn't waste syllables. His voice carried the weight of someone who had lived through too many nights where seconds meant the difference between survival and a folded flag. He towered beside her, clipboard forgotten under his arm. His eyes were already scanning hers, sharp and searching. She swallowed. "What's going on?" Raptor 7 went dark. The words were blunt, stripped of air. Pilot ejected over forest terrain south of Dayton. That aircraft was carrying classified intel. Armed groups are already moving toward the crash site. Her stomach twisted, but she forced a neutral shrug. "That's pilot business. I fix engines." Briggs didn't blink. "Don't insult me." He leaned in, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. "You think I haven't seen the way you know these jets? Like you've lived inside them. I've been around pilots my whole life. You don't talk like a mechanic, Hale. You talk like a flyer." She laughed, thin and unconvincing. "I just pay attention, read manuals, that's all." But he didn't let it go. He slid a tablet across the workbench, screen glowing with her file. She saw her name, her employment records, her tax filings, all neat, all in order until they weren't. Before the age of 14, nothing. No school, no medical, no family, just a void. Briggs jabbed a finger at the gap. People don't just appear, not unless they've got something to bury. Her pulse spiked. She had built that wall brick by brick, every document carefully forged, every detail crafted to withstand casual eyes. But Briggs wasn't casual. He was a predator who had caught her scent. "I came from nothing," she muttered, voice flat, rehearsed. "Refugee paperwork gets messy, families disappear." He shook his head. "No, this isn't messy. This is erased, and I don't believe in ghosts." The siren wailed again, sharper this time. Jets roared to life outside, engines thundering against her ribs. A voice crackled over Briggs's radio, urgent, metallic. "Rescue team needs air cover. Backup pilot is down. Command requires a fourth bird in the sky. 12 minutes. Briggs didn't look away from her. "You've got one chance to come clean, Hale. Have you ever flown an F-22? Her throat constricted. 11 years. 11 years of silence, of burying who she was. 11 years convincing herself she was no one, nothing but a mechanic in coveralls. She had learned to live with grease under her nails instead of fire in her veins. But now the question hung like a knife over her. She opened her mouth to deny it, but the hangar doors slammed wide, daylight flooding in like judgment. Colonel strode through, boots echoing like gunfire, his presence cutting through the chaos. His eyes landed on her, pinning her in place, and she knew there was no escaping. He didn't waste words. "Answer me directly. Have you flown a fighter?" Her lips parted. The truth escaped before she could stop it. "Yes." The air froze. "What type?" His voice was flint, sharp and unyielding. "F-16s, F-22s, enough to matter." The silence stretched, heavy and irreversible. Briggs exhaled, vindication flickering across his face. Didn't flinch. Instead, he fired questions, rapid, precise, designed to cut through pretenders. Low-altitude search pattern, wooded terrain, throttle setting. 75%. Thrust vectoring 15 degrees. Terrain radar engaged. Comms fallback if systems collapse. Guard channel 243. Emergency squawk 7700. Maintain recovery heading. Weapons protocol on recon flights. Master arm safe. Selector training. Confirm IFF before release. Blinked once. That was all. Her answers weren't rote. They were lived. Muscle memory forged in fire. Her hands curled into fists. I told you, I fix engines. His reply was colder than steel. Everything already changed. Briggs pressed a bag into her trembling hands. Her old flight gear, pulled from a locker she had sworn never to open again. Inside the small room, the walls seemed to close in. She pulled on the suit with unsteady fingers. The fabric whispered memories she had buried under 11 years of exile. The helmet sat in the bag, visor glinting under harsh light. Her hand shook as she lifted it. One breath, one choice. She lowered it over her head, and in that instant the trembling stopped. Her spine straightened, her eyes sharpened. When she stepped back into the hangar, the mechanic was gone. The pilot's specter was back. Outside, 3 Raptors screamed alive, pilots strapping in, crews scattering like sparks. Colonel pointed to the 4th. Shadow 4, that's your bird. She climbed the ladder, every rung echoing the years she had herself. The cockpit wrapped around her like an old scar, familiar, painful, inevitable. Her fingers moved without thought, flipping switches, running checks, her breath steady now. On the comms, his voice cut in, mission leader, sharp, distrustful. Shadow 4, if you screw this up, if one of us dies because of you, I'll drag what's left of you to a court-martial myself. Madison said nothing. She slid her visor down, reflecting glare back at her. No tremor, no fear. Engines howled. The Raptors rolled. The tarmac thundered beneath them as fire erupted from afterburners. Madison's hand rested on the throttle, and for the first time in 11 years, it felt like it belonged there. When her voice came over the tower frequency, steady and precise, the controller froze. Civilians didn't sound like that, not on his channel. Right tower, Shadow 4 requesting system check before departure. The air crackled with her return. And in that moment, Madison knew there was no going back. Spectre was airborne again. How could something forgotten feel so natural? The stick moved beneath her hand like it had never left. The jet responded to her every breath, every thought. 11 years gone, erased, buried under grease and silence. Yet here she was, skimming through sky as if the years had been nothing but a pause. Lightning flight maintained formation. His voice cracked across the comms, sharp as a blade. Shadow 4, keep your spacing. Don't improvise, not 1 inch. Madison's jaw tightened. She fell into position, sliding into the diamond as if her body remembered what her mind had sworn to forget. She kept her breathing slow, steady. She couldn't afford to reveal too much, not yet. Below, Ohio stretched like a green quilt. The forest canopy hid shadows that moved faster than any animal. The downed pilot's beacon pulsed faintly on her HUD, a digital heartbeat counting down the seconds he might have left. Lightning One's voice cut in again. Standard sweep, broad grid, stay high. It was protocol, safe, predictable, and too slow. Madison felt it in her bones. The formation was wrong. The sweep was wrong. She knew the forest wouldn't forgive hesitation. She pressed her comm switch, voice even. Recommend high-low division. 2 birds maintain overwatch. 2 run staggered passes low level. The channel went silent. Hesitation was palpable, her suspicion breathing through the static. Finally, copy, implementing Shadow 4's adjustment. Madison dropped low, throttle easing her beneath the canopy line. treetops blurred in streaks of green. Every vibration of the fuselage fed through her body like memory awakening muscle. She was home, and it terrified her. A faint spike lit her thermal readout, too regular to be wildlife, too deliberate to ignore. Lightning Flight Shadow 4. I've got anomalous heat signatures northeast ridge. 12 armed closing on beacon. Her words cracked the channel into silence. Then's reply, taut with disbelief. How the hell are you reading thermal that fine from here? Madison ignored the challenge. Coordinates uploaded, 3 clicks from crash site. Reality hit the flight like a hammer, confirmed the order. Jets pivoted east, engines screaming across the sky. Below, smoke curled faintly from the forest floor, the pilot's beacon glowing against the green. Madison's heart twisted. She remembered the feeling of waiting, of hearing the hunt coming for you and knowing rescue might never arrive. "Down bird, this is Shadow 4, she called, voice steady despite the pressure in her chest. "Confirm condition." Static snapped back, then a broken voice. "This is Price. Shoulders dislocated, can't move fast, hostiles closing in." Her HUD traced the terrain in seconds. A clearing southeast, hidden but wide enough for rotor extraction. "Downed bird, vector to coordinates 40.61 north, 84.29 west. You'll have cover from overhead." "Copy," his voice was strained, weak. "I see it, moving." Madison's pulse hammered, but her voice stayed cold. "Lightning, clear approach corridor." 2 Raptors split low, tearing the air above the tree line. Sonic shockwaves shook the branches, scattering the armed group below. Figures darted like ants scrambling under floodlight, but the jets boxed them in, forcing them back from the beacon. Minutes stretched like years. Madison watched every blip on her HUD, every faint flicker of heat moving closer or further. Her hand tightened on the throttle. Then came the thump of rotors. A Black Hawk burst through the canopy, blades chopping air into thunder. Rescue teams dropped, shadows on ropes sprinting through smoke. "Package secure, in progress." The call cracked relief across the channel. Madison exhaled, her chest trembling. For the first time in years, she had given something back. But relief carried a price. When the Raptors returned to base, the ground crews swarmed, guiding them into line. Madison climbed down the ladder slowly, boots solid against concrete. She felt eyes burning into her, waiting, measuring. In the debrief room, the air was sharp with suspicion. Leaned back in her chair, arms folded, eyes locked on Madison. "You knew things you shouldn't," she said flatly. "Thermal resolution, tactical coordination, that's not maintenance knowledge." Madison stayed silent, helmet in her lap, visor down to hide the storm in her eyes. Then noticed something. Her sleeve had slipped back, ink traced across her wrist, wings etched around a lightning bolt, letters beneath, TG0912. The room froze. His voice dropped like stone. "That mark, that's Top Gun, class designation." His eyes locked on her. "Class of 2012, 9th graduate." His lips parted, disbelief shaking her words. "That can't be. Top Gun doesn't lose graduates, they track everyone." Reached for a tablet. Data filled the screen, pulled from archives long closed. One name lit up, undeniable, Lieutenant Madison Hale. Call sign Spectre, top graduate, declared missing 11 years ago. The silence was suffocating. The mechanic, the ghost, the woman in grease-stained coveralls. She wasn't a substitute pilot. She was a legend that had vanished. Spectre had returned. What happens when the truth you've run from refuses to stay buried? Madison sat in the debriefing room, helmet heavy in her lap, the ink on her wrist exposed like a scar that could never heal. No excuses left. No shadows thick enough to hide in. The room held its breath. Eyes were fire, narrowed and unrelenting. Colonel studied her with a weight she couldn't read, part fury, part recognition, part something else. She wanted to shrink, to crawl back into coveralls and vanish, but that wasn't possible anymore. Within hours, command called for answers. Files were pulled, doors sealed. Madison was escorted into a secure chamber where the air itself felt classified. Around the table, officers spread documents like blades. At the center lay her name, Lieutenant Madison Hale, call sign Spectre, declared missing, presumed gone. Her eyes flicked to the words she had spent years pretending didn't exist. It was like reading her own obituary. Colonel broke the silence. We reopened the file. The training accident, 2012, the one that ended your career, or so they claimed. The file thickened with pages of telemetry, maintenance logs, cockpit recordings. Madison's pulse surged. She hadn't seen these since that night. She had never wanted to, but the weight of them pulled her eyes anyway. Official record, continued, blamed you. Said you pushed too far, said you lost a wingman, said you couldn't handle leadership. The words stabbed deeper than he knew. She had carried them like chains, rusted but unbreakable, for 11 long years. But then slid another page forward, his voice lowered. Classified telemetry, sealed until today. She forced herself to look. The screen glowed with jagged lines and codes she once read fluently. Hydraulic pressure collapsing, control system failing, warnings that came too late. Her breath hitched. It wasn't you, said quietly. The failure was mechanical, catastrophic, unrecoverable. The room's silence bent under the revelation. Briggs read aloud, his voice tight. When the system collapsed, you maneuvered the formation clear. 4 jets survived because of you. Kelly Ward's jet was doomed before the exercise even began. Kelly, her wingman, her friend, the one whose death had haunted every night since. Madison's fists clenched until her nails cut into her palms. She had carried the guilt like penance carved into bone, convinced she had been reckless, that her youth and arrogance had stolen a life. But the data said otherwise. She wasn't reckless, she had been decisive, she hadn't killed Kelly, she had saved 4 others. Still, the ache didn't vanish, because the truth didn't rewrite the past. Kelly was still gone, and Madison had still run. But another name bled through the records. Commander Blake Turner. His notes filled the margins, complaints, accusations, venom written in official ink. Arrogant, impulsive, dangerous. Tap the file. Turner painted you reckless at every turn. Performance reports show his decline, slipping scores, poor judgment. He was on the edge of removal, but your accident gave him cover. By blaming you, he saved himself. Madison's chest tightened. She remembered his voice, sharp in briefings, dismissive in the ready room, his eyes that looked at her not as a pilot but as a problem. She had believed his words then, believed the panels when they nodded along, believed the silence that followed when no one defended her. Now the truth stood bare. She hadn't failed, she had been failed. A hearing was called. Madison walked into the chamber with her flight jacket folded over her arm, not as a mechanic in Greece, but as the ghost they could no longer deny. Across from her sat Turner, uniform pressed sharp, jaw clenched, eyes burning with the desperation of a man cornered. The panel began with facts, telemetry projected on screens, maintenance logs recited, witness testimonies read aloud, each piece chipped away at Turner's carefully built wall. His voice cut through like steel. System defect, hydraulic collapse, independent of tactical decision. The evidence was irrefutable. Turner tried to push back, voice straining. She drove beyond limits, everyone knew it. She was reckless. But the panel cut him off. Everyone didn't know it, you said it, and your own reports show your motive. His face paled. Silence replaced his bluster. And in that silence his career collapsed, not with a bang but with the hollow weight of truth. For Madison there was no triumph, only exhaustion. Justice had come, but too late for Kelly, too late for the years she had spent in exile. 2 days later she drove to the cemetery outside Dayton. Leaves scattered across gray stone, whispering like voices she would never hear again. She carried a helmet in her hands, the same type they once wore side by side. She knelt at the grave, Kelly Ward etched in granite. Her voice was low, steady. "I've been hiding long enough." The wind took the words and carried them into silence. She touched the stone once, then rose. The weight of exile no longer chained her. And when the call came, she didn't run. What does it mean to come back to a world that already wrote you off? Madison stood on the flight line at Naval Air Station, wind tugging at her jacket, engines rumbling in the distance like ghosts calling her name. She had thought her story was finished, that she would fade in coveralls until time itself forgot her. But here she was, summoned back under a new banner, a program waiting for her name. They called it the Spectre Initiative. Colonel had been blunt when he explained it. Pilots trained not just to follow doctrine but to bend it, break it, survive in the cracks where chaos ruled. Pilots who could see the fight before it happened. The kind who thought like she did. 12 young aviators stood in crisp formation as she approached. Their uniforms shone, their boots lined perfectly, but their eyes betrayed them, nervous, eager, burning with the fire of people desperate to prove themselves. Whispers rippled low when they saw her. They'd heard the stories, the ghost who vanished, the legend who returned. His voice carried across the tarmac. "Lieutenant Commander Madison Hale, call sign Spectre, she will lead your training." The name hung in the air, and the recruits straightened, as if the weight of it pressed their spines taller. Madison stopped in front of them, visor tucked under her arm. She looked into their faces, untested but hungry, and felt a strange ache in her chest. They didn't know the years she had spent in shadows. They only saw the myth standing before them. Her voice came low, even, but it cut through the noise of the flight line. "You're here because someone believes you can be more than standard. My job is to prove them right." For a moment, silence held. Then one of the recruits, barely more than a boy, nodded, his eyes locked on her like she carried the answers he'd been searching for. Madison's throat tightened. She wasn't sure she had answers. Later in the briefing room, the walls hummed with projectors and maps. She walked them through scenarios, dissected failures, tore doctrine apart piece by piece. She watched their faces shift from confusion to clarity, from hesitation to hunger. It reminded her of her own days at Top Gun, nights filled with equations scrawled across whiteboards, dawns lit by afterburners screaming into desert sky. She had once been them, bright, certain, unbroken. And yet she remembered what followed, the accident, the silence, the exile. When the session ended, was waiting outside the door, arms crossed. No uniform crispness could hide the rawness in her eyes. She had been the first to threaten Madison, the first to question her, the first to glare with suspicion. Now her voice was quieter. "You're different with them," said. "Not like in the cockpit. You hold back there, but with them, you don't." Madison hesitated. "I don't want them to carry what I did." Tilted her head. "What you think you did?" She pushed off the wall, her tone softening. "They don't need a ghost, they need a leader." The words dug deep. That night Madison lay awake in her quarters, staring at the ceiling as desert wind rattled the windows. She thought of Kelly's face, laughing in pre-flight, steady in formation, gone in fire. She thought of the 11 years she had erased, the silence she had lived in, the wrench she had held instead of a stick. Now command wanted her to lead, to teach, to shape young pilots into something stronger than standard, but she still wondered if she deserved to. At dawn, the engines roared to life again. Raptors screamed skyward, climbing into burning sunrise. Madison stood at the line, visor in hand, watching one break from the formation and split into the blue. The roar shook the ground beneath her. The sight tightened her chest. She saw herself in that climb, the pilot she once was, the leader she was becoming, the myth that refused to stay buried. Some legends don't vanish. They wait in silence, hidden in plain sight, until the world needs them again. How do you teach people to trust you when you still don't trust yourself? Madison stood in front of the projector, the desert morning spilling through narrow windows, the scent of jet fuel drifting faintly in from the line. 12 young pilots sat in rows, notebooks open, eyes restless. They had trained under structure their entire lives. Doctrine, repetition, discipline. Now she was here to strip all of that away. She clicked to the next slide, an aerial grid split into quadrants. "Tell me what you see," she said. One recruit answered immediately. "Standard sweep pattern, recon protocol for wooded terrain." "Wrong," her voice was even sharp. "That's doctrine, not reality. You sweep wide like this, you'll miss what's right under you. Doctrine will get you killed if you don't learn to bend it." Murmurs spread, discomfort rippling through the room. Another recruit, this one older, sharper, leaned forward. "With respect, ma'am, isn't doctrine written to keep us alive?" Madison met his gaze. "No, doctrine is written to keep commanders comfortable. Survival, that's on you." The room went quiet. She let the silence hang heavy until their eyes stopped darting and settled on her. Only then did she continue. By the end of the day, their nerves were frayed. She had thrown scenarios at them they weren't ready for, ambushes layered into weather failures, communications cut at the worst possible time. Half of them failed their simulations. One left the room shaking with frustration. That night Madison sat in her quarters, helmet resting on the desk beside her. She rubbed her temples, guilt twisting in her gut. Was she pushing too hard? Was she becoming the thing Turner once accused her of, reckless, cruel, unfit to lead? She closed her eyes. Kelly's voice haunted her again. "You don't have to carry it all alone." But she had carried it alone, for 11 years. The next morning she walked into the briefing room to find waiting, arms crossed, a smirk tugging faintly at her lips. "You're rattling them," said. "They need it." "Do they, or do you?" Eyes softened, but her words stayed sharp. "You're not training machines, you're training people, and people don't bend if you break them first." The recruits entered then, chatter dying the moment they saw Madison. She caught the way some avoided her eyes, the way others stared too hard, hungry for her approval, afraid of her disappointment. She stood at the front. "Yesterday was rough, good, you'll thank me for that someday. But today," she paused, scanning their faces, "today I'm going to show you why doctrine isn't enough." They followed her out onto the line. Sunlight glared off steel as 4 raptors crouched, canopies open. She split them into groups. 2 would fly by the book, 2 would fly her way. "Same objective," she said. "Simulated rescue, forest terrain, armed hostiles. You'll see who makes it home." Engines roared to life. The desert shook as the jets screamed skyward. Madison watched from the tower, headset pressing against her ears. The first formation moved steady, precise by regulation. Predictable. The second bent rules, cut corners, moved faster, riskier. She felt her pulse climb as she listened, as if her body still flew with them. Minutes stretched, then the calls came in. "Hostiles overwhelmed us, mission failure." Followed by "objective secured, successful." The recruits returned, sweat dripping despite the cool air of their cockpits. Frustration burned on one side, exhilaration on the other. Madison stood before them all. "That," she said, voice steady, "is why you don't worship doctrine. It's a guide, not a gospel. Learn it, respect it. But when the world doesn't play by rules, neither can you." One recruit raised his hand. "But what if we get it wrong?" Her throat tightened. She thought of Kelly, thought of the accident, thought of the 11 years she'd spent believing she had gotten it wrong. "You will," she said finally, her voice low. "You will get it wrong, and it will cost you. But hesitation costs more. Trust yourself even when you're afraid, especially then." For a moment the recruits were silent. Then the younger one, the boy who had nodded to her on her first day, spoke quietly. "That's why they call you Spectre, isn't it? Because you don't just follow the fight, you haunt it." Madison felt something shift in her chest. The name she had once tried to bury no longer felt like a curse. It felt like a warning and a promise. When the day ended, caught her outside the hangar. "They're starting to believe in you," she said. Madison shook her head. "No, They're starting to believe in themselves. But when she looked back at the line of raptors against the setting sun, she knew the truth. The recruits weren't the only ones learning. She was too. What happens when the simulation ends and the danger is real? The call came before dawn, sharp and unrelenting. Madison was already awake, sleep having abandoned her hours before. She sat on the edge of her bunk, boots half-laced, when the knock rattled her door. "Commander Hale," the runner said, voice tight. "Command needs you on the line now." She was already moving. The briefing room buzzed with static tension. A map glowed on the wall, coordinates pulsing red. An Allied cargo transport had gone silent over the Nevada desert, last ping near a canyon known for turbulence and worse. Radio dead. Engine trail faint on satellite. The possibility of hostile interference unconfirmed. His voice was calm but clipped. "Spectre initiative will deploy as support. Shadow flight you'll escort search and recovery. This is not a drill." Madison's recruits straightened in their chairs, some too stiff, others too pale. She saw the tremor in their hands, the flicker of fear they tried to bury. She knew that feeling. She had worn it once before experience had burned it into steel. She stood at the front. "You've trained for this, you're ready. Follow the sky, not the fear. Remember what I told you, doctrine guides you but instinct saves you." Their helmets snapped down. Engines roared alive. The desert floor trembled as raptors lined up, afterburners spitting fire into gray morning. Madison climbed into her jet, visor sliding over her eyes, the cockpit closing around her like a memory she had never escaped. They launched in diamond formation, cutting through cloud, Nevada sprawling endless beneath them. The silence of ascent was broken only by his voice over comms, steady, professional but tight. "Shadow flight maintain heading. Eyes sharp." Minutes stretched, each one a weight pressing down. Then Madison's radar lit faint. A trace. Engine heat bleeding weakly against canyon walls. "I've got contact," she said, voice calm. "Bearing 172, low altitude." They dropped into the canyon. Rock walls rose like teeth, turbulence shaking them hard enough to rattle bones. And there, smoke curling faintly from the jagged floor below. The transport lay torn open, wings snapped, fuselage cracked but mostly intact. Relief flickered, survivors were possible. But so was danger. Her HUD lit again, heat signatures, not just from wreckage. Moving, too organized for chance. Shadow flight, multiple hostiles. 5, maybe 6, armed, setting perimeter. The recruits' voices cracked across the comms, tight and nervous. "Do we engage?" Madison's pulse thudded, but her voice stayed cold. "No, hold over, watch, contain. Rescue is inbound. Your job is deterrence, not destruction." Below, the survivors staggered from the wreck, waving frantically, their movements desperate against the canyon floor. Armed figures closed in, rifles slung, steps too purposeful to be scavengers. The recruits shifted, voices edging panic. "They're closing fast, Commander, orders." Madison remembered Kelly, the silence of waiting, the seconds that stretched into eternity when rescue felt impossible. She couldn't let that repeat. "Shadow 2, low pass. Don't fire, just scare them." The young pilot dove, jet howling inches above the canyon floor. Dust exploded skyward. Hostiles scattered, tripping, scrambling for cover. The survivors threw themselves flat, covering their heads. "Shadow 3, cover the south ridge. Shadow 4, hold altitude with me. Keep your lock but don't release." Her recruits obeyed, their voices taut but alive. For the first time she heard something new in them. Not panic, not doctrine, but instinct shaping itself into confidence. Minutes bled into hours. The rescue chopper carved its way through canyon winds, blades chopping thunder against stone. Teams dropped, hauling survivors aboard under the protective shadow of raptors circling above. "Package secure," the helo called. "In progress." Relief cracked open across the channel. One by one the recruits' voices steadied, disbelief mixing with pride. They had done it, Not perfectly, not clean, but alive. On return, the tarmac shimmered in the afternoon heat. Engines whined down, canopies lifted. Madison climbed out, boots steady on concrete. Her recruits gathered, sweat streaking their faces, helmets tucked under trembling arms. One spoke first, his voice thin but fierce. "I thought I was going to choke up there, but I didn't." Another added, "When you said instinct saves you, I felt it. I knew what to do." Madison studied their faces. They weren't rookies anymore, not entirely. The desert had taken some of their fear and carved it into something sharper. That night, as she walked alone under a sky lit with stars, she realized something she hadn't dared before. For 11 years, she had run from leadership, convinced she wasn't worthy of guiding anyone, not even herself. But these 12 had looked to her and survived because of it. The ghosts of her past still followed, but maybe now, for the first time, she wasn't walking with them alone. How quickly does training dissolve when the fight turns real? The call came at dusk, urgent, clipped. Madison and her recruits had barely shaken the dust of their first mission when the order dropped like stone into water. A foreign incursion, small, fast, aggressive, slipping into restricted airspace near the Pacific coast. Not a drill, not a shadow exercise. A fight. In the ready room, the recruits' faces shifted from fatigue to pale determination. They had tasted adrenaline once. Now the flavor came back stronger, sharper. Some hands shook as helmets were sealed. Madison scanned them all, her gaze steady, her voice low. "You don't rise to the occasion," she told them. "You fall to your training, trust what we built, trust yourselves, and trust each other." Engines screamed alive across the runway. Raptors crouched in rows, afterburners splitting twilight. Madison's jet roared as she pushed the throttle forward, formation lifting into the fading light. The ocean spread endless beneath them, horizon glowing blood-red. Radar lit first, fast movers, 4 of them slicing the edge of restricted airspace. Not full fighters, but strike craft, armed and reckless enough to test response. The recruits' voices crackled across comms, strained but professional. "Contact bearing 165, closing fast." Madison's chest tightened. This was no simulation. These weren't mock signatures on a screen. These were men with weapons, intent unknown, danger absolute. "Shadow flight," she said, calm steadying her. "Hold formation, do not fire unless engaged, but do not blink." The hostile craft drew closer, HUD symbols locking on, angles shifting in predatory dance. Her recruits wavered, voices breaking through. "They're painting us, should we break?" "Hold," Madison snapped. A tense beat stretched. Then one of the enemy jets broke formation, diving low, locking hard on Shadow 3. "Missile tone," the recruit cried, panic cracking through the channel. "Break countermeasures now," Madison barked. Flares burst, a streak of fire cutting the sky. The recruit yanked hard, jet snapping into evasive roll. The missile missed by inches, streaking harmlessly into ocean. The channel erupted. Voices clashed, fear bleeding through training. Madison cut in, steel in her tone. "Listen to me. You are not prey. You are predators. Stay on me. Pair up. Hunt as 2. Her jet peeled right, pulling Shadow 2 into wing position. Together they cut across the sky, engines howling, locking on to the diverging strike craft. Shadow 4 mirrored her with, closing the noose. The recruits' breathing filled the comms, ragged but present. Their hands moved without hesitation now, instincts overriding panic. They weren't breaking, they were bending into something sharper. Madison locked tone, thumb hovering over trigger. For 11 years she had sworn she'd never fire again, but the choice wasn't hers anymore. "Shadow flight," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Weapons free." The sky tore open. Missiles screamed, flares burst, jets twisted in lethal arcs. The recruits flew harder than they ever had, not perfect, not clean, but together. His voice cut sharp, splash one as an enemy went down in fire. Another broke wide, fleeing fast. The last two pressed reckless, but the recruits boxed them, cutting angles, forcing errors until one spiraled out, smoke trailing into ocean. The final hostile bolted, retreating into international airspace. Silence followed, heavy and ragged, broken only by the sound of labored breathing over comms. Madison exhaled. Shadow flight form up, return to base. They landed in silence, boots heavy on tarmac, canopies lifting into night air thick with jet fuel. The recruits removed helmets slowly, eyes wide, faces pale. One of them, barely more than a kid, was shaking so hard he could barely hold his gear. Madison stepped closer, resting a gloved hand on his shoulder. You held, you lived, that's the job. He swallowed, nodding, though his eyes brimmed with the weight of what he had just done, what they had all just done. Later, in the quiet of her quarters, Madison stared at her reflection in the dark window. For years, she had buried herself in exile, convinced she wasn't fit to lead, not fit to fly, not fit to carry anyone's life but her own. Tonight, 12 young pilots had trusted her with theirs, and they had survived. The ghosts hadn't left. They never would. But maybe now she wasn't just carrying them. She was teaching others how to live with theirs. Outside, engines rumbled faintly on the night line, a reminder that the world never stopped moving, never stopped needing those willing to rise. And Madison knew the hardest test was still to come. What happens when the last ghost finally steps out of the shadows? Madison stood on the edge of the runway, desert wind tugging at her flight suit, the night sky bruised with clouds. The base was quiet now, but tomorrow wouldn't be. Tomorrow, Command wanted her team in the air again, this time against a threat larger, more organized, more ruthless than anything her recruits had faced. She watched them in the hangar, 12 young aviators moving with restless energy. They checked gear, traded clipped jokes, tried to bury nerves under bravado. She recognized every mask. They were the same ones she had worn years ago, back when she believed certainty could hide fear. Appeared at her side, silent for a moment before speaking. "They're ready," she said. Madison shook her head. "No one is ever ready, not for what's coming." "Neither were you," countered, "but you carried us through." The words lodged deep, but Madison said nothing. She wasn't sure if meant the last mission, or the life Madison had dragged back from the grave. The order came at dawn, hostile forces moving on Allied ground units. Air support required immediately. This wasn't a skirmish. It was combat, open and unflinching. Madison walked the line, meeting each recruit's eyes as they strapped in. Some nodded, some looked away, but all of them listened when she spoke. "You're afraid," she told them, voice cutting through the roar of engines. "Good. Fear keeps you alive, but don't let it own you. Own the sky instead. Trust yourselves, trust each other. That's all that matters." They launched into a rising sun, raptors splitting the morning, thunder rolling across the desert. The sky filled with targets fast, hostile craft swarming, ground fire flashing like angry stars below. The recruits' comms lit with panic at first, calls overlapping, fear bleeding through. Madison's voice cut sharp, steady. "Pair up, stay tight, don't chase kills, cover each other." And they listened. Shadow flight bent into formation, weaving through fire with instincts sharpened under her hand. Missiles streaked, flares blossomed, jets twisted in violent arcs. The recruits flew not perfectly but together, mistakes caught by partners, weaknesses shielded, strength shared. Madison tore through the fight, HUD alive with chaos, every move threading instinct and memory. Her chest tightened with each voice she counted, each heartbeat alive on comms. For 11 years she had believed she wasn't fit to lead. Now 12 young aviators, survival hung on her voice, and for the first time she didn't doubt. The fight dragged, brutal and relentless. His voice cracked 2 on my 6, and Madison rolled without thought, locking, firing, cutting one hostile out of the sky. Shadow 3 screamed low to cover a retreating wingman. Shadow 7's voice trembled but held as he pulled evasive maneuvers she drilled into him a dozen times. And then silence. The radar cleared. The sky emptied. The last hostile broke away, fleeing into horizon. For a long moment no one spoke. Only heavy breathing filled the channel. Then a voice shaking, disbelieving. "We made it." They returned to base battered but intact. One jet by shrapnel, another low on fuel, but every pilot alive. Madison climbed down from her cockpit, boots hitting the tarmac steady as steel. Her recruits stood in a loose line, helmets off, eyes wide. One by one they looked at her, not as the ghost they'd whispered about, not as the myth command had dragged from shadows, but as something simpler, a leader who hadn't let them fall. Later, alone on the quiet edge of the flight line, Madison set her visor down and stared into the horizon. The ghost still lingered, Kelly's face, the years of exile, the weight of silence. They would never leave, but they no longer owned her. Because tonight, for the first time in years, she hadn't just flown for herself. She had flown for them, for the ones who trusted her, for the ones who needed her, for the ones who would come after. Engines roared somewhere distant, another flight taking off, another story beginning. Madison closed her eyes, breathing deep, steady. Some burdens don't vanish. Some scars never fade. But sometimes redemption doesn't come in silence. It comes in choosing to rise again, even when you swore you never would. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.